following the Oraysa.com Amud Yomi schedule. Masechet Rosh Hashana, Daf Bet Amud Aleph. Arba'a Rashe Shanim Hem. There are 4 new years. Be'echad Benisan Rosh Hashana LaMelachim VeLaRegalim. The first of Nisan is considered a new year for kings and for Regalim, for the holidays. What does it mean that the first of Nisan is Rosh Hashana LaMelachim? We reckon a new year in a king's reign by the first of Nisan. By the first of Nisan, that begins a new year in the king's reign. For example, let's say you have a king that was appointed, that was coronated in the month of Shevat or in the month of Adar. Once Echad Benisan comes, that already is considered his second year. This is important. We will see in the Gemara for legal documents. Vela Regalim, the Gemara is going to explain what this means. Be'echad be'elul Rosh Hashana le'ma'aseh behema. The first of the month of Elul, that is considered Rosh Hashana for ma'aseh behema. What does that mean? When a person comes to take a tenth, comes to take ma'aseh from cattle, from sheep, from goats, he's only allowed to take ma'aseh, for example, from sheep. He's only allowed to take ma'aseh from sheep, 4 sheep that were all born in the same year. But if a person wants to take ma'aseh from sheep that was born in 1 year, for sheep that was born in a different year, that a person is not allowed to do. Once again, you may only take ma'aseh for sheep from sheep that was born in the same year. What is the cutoff period? The cutoff period is Bechad Be'elul. So any sheep that were born before the first of Elul may not be used as ma'aseh for sheep that was born after Echad Be'elul. The only sheep that may be used for ma'aseh for sheep that was born is all the sheep that was born after the first of Elul until before the next Elul. Those sheep, any of those sheep may be used as ma'aseh for sheep that was born that year. And the same goes for cattle, and the same goes for goats. Rabbi Elazar veRabbi Shimon omrim be'echad betishrei. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon argue that when it comes to ma'aseh behema, it's not the first of Elul that is the cutoff point, that is the new year. It is the first of Tishrei. Be'echad betishrei Rosh Hashana lashanim. How do we calculate a calendar year? How do we reckon a calendar year? The first of Tishrei begins a new calendar year. Velashmitin velayovelot lanetiyah velayerakot. Velashmitin, we know every 7 years the land has to be left fallow. When does the year of Shemitah, when does the 7th year begin? It begins on the first of Tishrei. A farmer is no longer allowed to work his field on the 7th year, beginning the first of Tishrei. Vela Yovelot, Yovel is like Shemitah. Yovel comes out on the 50th year. Beginning the first of Tishrei, a farmer is no longer allowed to work his field. La neti'ah, for planting. This is referring to Orla. The first 3 years of a tree, a person may not partake of the fruit. How do you calculate years regarding Orla? The first of Tishrei begins a new year for the calculation of the years of Orla. For example, let's say a person planted a tree in the month of Av or Elul. Comes the first of Tishrei, that is already considered the 2nd year. He only planted it, example, in the month of Av or Elul, but each time the first of Tishrei comes, that marks a new year as far as Orla is concerned. Vela yerakot, for vegetables. We know that there are certain portions that people had to give. They had to give terumah, they had to give maaser, maaser rishon, maaser sheni, maaser ani. How do you calculate the giving of these different portions? You calculate it according to the first of Tishrei. For example, for vegetables, you may not give maaser of vegetables picked in 1 year for vegetables picked in a different year. When you give maaser for vegetables, it must be from vegetables that were all picked in the same year. I cannot give maaser for vegetables picked in one year from vegetables picked in a different year. What is the cutoff date? The cutoff date is Echad Betishrei. I cannot give vegetables that were picked before Echad Betishrei as teruma or maaser for vegetables that were picked after Echad Betishrei, after the first of Tishrei. Be'echad b'shvat Rosh Hashana la'ilan kedivrei Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel omrem b'chamisha asar. I also have to give trumot and masrot. I have to give my teruma and my maaser from fruits of the tree. How do I calculate a year, a new year for the fruits of a tree? That, according to Bet Shammai, is the 1st of Shevat. According to Bet Hillel, that is the 15th of Shevat. Meaning fruits that emerged, according to Bet Shammai, fruits that emerged from before Echad v'Shevat, I cannot use them as Truma and Maaser for fruits that emerged after Echad b'Shevat. The only fruits that I can use, that I can give as Truma and Maaser, have to all have emerged in the same year. But once again, fruits that emerged from a tree in one year cannot be used as Truma and Maaser for fruits that emerged in a different year. Once again, what is considered a new year? What is the cutoff point? The cutoff point is Echad b'Shevat. Echad b'Shevat begins a new year for fruits that are emerging from the tree. According to Bet Hillel, it's not Echad b'Shevat. He argues on Bet Shammai. It is the 15th of Shevat. Let's go into the Gemara. The Gemara says, going back into the Mishnah, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hem Be'echad Benisan Rosh Hashana LaMelachim. How do we reckon the years of a king's rule? We reckon it according to the 1st of Nisan. Every 1st of Nisan begins a new year in the reign of a king's rule. Lemay Hilchata. What purpose does this halacha serve? What do we need? Where's the application of this halacha? What is the application of this halacha? Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Lishtarot, for legal documents, for debit documents. The Gemara is going to explain. They used to put the years of a king's reign on their legal documents. Ditnan. Shtarei chov hamukdamin pesulin, ve'ameucharin kesherin. Debit documents that are predated are invalid. Debit documents that are post-dated are valid. What does that mean? Reuven, let's take an example. Reuven lent Shimon money on the 1st of Nisan. Reuven lent Shimon $100 on the 1st of Nisan. They predated the document. They did not put the 1st of Nisan. They put, for example, the 20th of Adar. They predated the document 10 days earlier. How does that affect the situation? We know that when a person borrows money, automatically there's a lien on all his properties. So now that Reuven let Shimon $100, there is a lien on his properties that if Shimon cannot pay back the loan of $100, Reuven can go and collect one of his properties that's worth $100. This is true even if Shimon sells his property. Even if Shimon sells his property, since there's a lien on the property, Reuven can still go to the property that was sold and collect his $100 from that property. If you predate a document, that means Reuven can now go and collect his loan from Shimon. If Shimon defaults on the loan, Reuven can now go and collect money from a property that was sold before there was a lien on it. When does the lien go into effect? The lien goes into effect on the date that Reuven lent money to Shimon, which was the 1st of Nisan. On the 1st of Nisan, when Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, that's when the lien goes on all his properties. However, if Shimon sold a property before the 1st of Nisan, there's no lien on that property. That was sold before the loan. But if you have a predated document, even though the loan only happened on the 1st of Nisan, but the document states that it happened on the 20th of Adar, and Shimon had already sold a property on the 25th of Adar, now Reuven can illegally go, because of this shtar that's predated, he can go and collect his loan from this property that was sold on the 25th of Adar, because according to the document, according to this debit document, there's a lien on it. But the debit document is predated. It's incorrect. It should have said the 1st of Nisan, and therefore any properties that Shimon has or sold from the 1st of Nisan, there's a lien. But any properties that Shimon had or sold before the 1st of Nisan, there is no lien if Shimon sold them. However, since the document says the 20th of Adar, and Shimon went and sold a property on the 25th of Adar, Reuven can now illegally go collect from this property, because it says it happened on the 20th of Adar, even though it only really happened, in reality, it only really happened on the 1st of Nisan, which meaning that the lien only kicked in on the 1st of Nisan. Therefore, a predated document is invalid. It's illegal. Ditnan, shtarei chov hamukdamin pesulin, vehameucharin kesherin. But post-dated documents are perfectly valid. Why? Because essentially the lender is shooting himself in the foot. The loan happened on the 1st of Nisan. The lender allows that on the document that it doesn't say the 1st of Nisan, it says the 10th of Nisan. That means, according to the document, even though the loan happened, even though the loan was executed on the 1st of Nisan, it doesn't go, because it says the 10th of Nisan, any lien on any of Shimon's properties are only going to kick in, they're only going to start to apply on the 10th of Nisan. That means the lender loses out on 10 days. Let's say Shimon, he had a property on the 1st of Nisan, and he sold this property on the 5th of Nisan. Theoretically, really, Reuven can go collect from that property if Shimon defaults on the loan. Because the loan happened on the 1st of Nisan, Shimon owned the property at the time, there was a lien on the property, Shimon went and sold it on the 5th of Nisan. Reuven should be able to go and collect from this property if Shimon defaults on the loan. However, the document doesn't say the 1st of Nisan, the document says the 10th of Nisan. According to the document, the liens on any of Shimon's property only kick in on the 10th of Nisan. Since the lender agreed to this date on the document, it is perfectly valid, because at the end of the day, it is the lender who's hurting himself. So therefore, this is lehalacha, a valid document. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, with this background, let's answer our question. What is the halachic application of putting the exact date of when a king was coronated, when he became king? Tanu Rabbanan, as follows. So now that we have this background, let's say you have the following case. Reuven lent money to Shimon. He lent Shimon $100. Shimon went and he asked two witnesses who did not witness the transaction to sign on a document that says that he, Shimon, borrowed money from Reuven in the month of Kislev. The two witnesses sign on the document. This document comes before Bet Din. Now the document says, for example, in the 3rd year of the king's reign, in Kislev of the 3rd year of the king's reign, Shimon borrowed money from Reuven. It has two witnesses signed on it. It's Shimon that went, who got two witnesses that did not witness the actual transaction, but he told them, I borrowed money from Reuven, month of Kislev, in the 3rd year of the king's reign. Now Bet Din looks at this document, and they go and they interrogate the witnesses. The witnesses say, look, we did not actually see this transaction happen, but we did see a different transaction happen. In the month of Tammuz, Shimon borrowed the exact same amount of money from Reuven. That is what we saw. We did not see a transaction happen in the month of Kislev, even though we signed on the document. We saw a transaction happen in the month of Tammuz for the exact same amount that Shimon borrowed from Reuven. Now, if we don't know in what month the king became king, all it says in the document is in the 3rd year of the king's reign, in the month of Kislev, Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, and there's two signatories, there's two edim signed on it. So we could potentially get into the following scenario. If the king became king between the month of Tammuz and Kislev, then what we have over here is a predated document. The document says that Shimon borrowed money from Reuven in the month of Kislev in the 3rd year. We don't know which month the king became king. So if it happened sometimes between the month of Tammuz and Kislev, now we have a predated document, because Kislev of the 3rd year comes before Tammuz of the 3rd year. Let's say the king became king in the month of Tishrei, sometimes between Tammuz and the month of Kislev. So if the king became king in the month of Tishrei, the document says that this transaction was executed in Kislev. The witnesses say they saw a transaction of a similar nature happen in the month of Tammuz. This is now a predated document, and it's invalid. However, if the king became king, it says on the document, it's in the 3rd year of his reign. If he became king sometime between the month of Kislev and Tammuz, for example, he became king in the month of Nisan. Now, this is a post-dated document, because if he became king in the month of Nisan, the witnesses are testifying that in the month of Tammuz they witnessed the transaction, and they signed on a document that says Kislev. That being the case, this is now a post-dated document, and it's perfectly valid. It all depends on which month did the king become king. Because of such a potential scenario, because of such a potential case, the Chachamim made a standardized date when the new year of a king's reign begins for all kings in all situations, in order to avoid a potential situation, a potential misunderstanding of whether this is a predated debit document or a post-dated debit document. Once again, because a predated debit document is invalid, it is illegal. A post-dated debit document is valid, it's perfectly legal. Why? Because when it's predated, you can that will allow a person to illegally collect from properties that maybe he's not allowed to collect from. A post-dated document, the lender's just shooting himself in the foot. He's taking away from himself the opportunity to potentially collect from certain properties. That is his discretion. In any case, in order to avoid a scenario where we don't know whether it's a predated document or a post-dated document, since the documents say the years of the king's reign, they also have to put, the Chachamim made that we have to know which month. We have to have a standardized date, which month kings begin a new year for all kings, regardless of when they initially took up their position, regardless of when they were coronated. We need a standardized date, what begins the new year of a king's reign, and that is the 1st of Nisan. Tanu Rabbanan, Melech she'amad be'esrim v'tisha be'adar. Let's say you have a king who was coronated, who took his position as king on the 29th of Adar. Kevan shegia echad benisan. Since once it comes the 1st of Nisan, alta lo shana. That's already considered 1 year, even though he only became king on the 29th of Adar. Once the 1st of Nisan comes, that's already considered 1 year. Now he's beginning his 2nd year. V'im lo amad ela be'echad benisan, en monin lo shana ad sheyagia Nisan acher. And if he only became king on the 1st of Nisan, that's still considered within. That is considered within the 1st year, and we don't count the 2nd year or a new year until the following Nisan. Amar bar Melech shamad be'esrim v'tisha be'adar, kivan shegia echad benisan, alta lo shana. A king that became king on the 29th of Adar. Once the first of Adar comes, once it's the first of Adar, that's already considered as if he's been king for a full year. We consider it 1 year. Ha Kamash Malan, we see from here, the Nisan, Rosh Hashana LaMelachim, the Yom B'Shana, Hashuv Shana. That from here we have a proof, from here we learn that Nisan is Rosh Hashana LaMelachim, the Yom Echad, and that 1 day in the year can be considered a complete year. Bezrat Hashem, Rabotai, we will continue with Daf Bet Amud Bet tomorrow.